Good afternoon, everybody. Hello, Danse. Welcome. My name is Janelle Eco Aboriginal, and I am your host today for the event of the Spitzer series of the Heritage Festival of Saskatoon. Today, we are presenting Lisa Bird to this event. Hello, welcome. Wow. Welcome to our space. My name is Janelle Puapskonius, also known as Eco Aboriginal. I'm coming to you live, virtually, I guess, from which is within the boundaries of Saskatchewan or within the Treaty 6 territories. So welcome to our territories from wherever you are. This is the virtual presentation that we have for today at 2 p.m. featuring Lisa Bird Wilson. So thank you for coming. Welcome to our space. We welcome comments and questions. So if you have any comments or questions, please feel free to put them in the chat as you will. And I will be taking care of some of those things to present to Lisa to be able to have a discussion on in a little bit here. So without further ado, let us actually get started. But actually, you know what? Speaking of territory, I would like to say a few words about that item. So we are coming together from different places in Canada, North America, maybe across the world even. And that's cool. So this group has a peoples or a host spanning the entire province of Saskatchewan. We have treaties 2, 4, 5, 6, and 8 within the boundaries, which means we have a wonderful diversity of treaty territories, as well as the traditional homeland of the Métis, as well as the Nehiawak, the Anishinaabe, the Dakota, Lakota, Nakota Nations, the Saulteaux, the Cree, and those that have come before them and those yet to come. So welcome to this territory. I would also like to introduce our speaker today. So Lisa Bird Wilson is a Métis and Nehio writer whose work appears in literary magazines and anthologies across Canada. Her fiction book, Just Pretending, was a finalist for the National Glebe Literary Award and won 4 Saskatchewan Book Awards, including the 2014 Book of wonky here. Pardon. Book of the Year. Whoa. Her new novel, Probably Ruby, is published in Canada by Doubleday and in the USA by Hogwarts Random House. She lives in Saskatoon and works as the executive of the Gabriel Dumont Institute. So let's welcome to our space, Lisa Bird Wilson. Hi, Lisa, welcome.
And say hello. Well, first of all, I would like to start by saying thank you, Marcy Janelle, for that really good, terrific introduction. And also Marcy to the Heritage Festival for inviting me here to be a part of the festival and to talk about my new book and do a little bit of reading from Probably Ruby. And I'll just show you the cover there. So this is my latest book. It came out in August of 2021. And as much as I would have loved not to have a book come out in the pandemic, that just wasn't set to be. So everything that I've done, all of the festivals, all of the promo, everything except one festival, the Anskook Festival in November, everything else has been virtual. And so it's been a really different experience to launch a book and to do all of these events virtually. And I don't know, I just sort of keep saying that we have to embrace the awkwardness of it or whatever it is. If there's glitches, if things don't go right, that's just the way it is. That's kind of where we're at in the situation that we're in. And, I'm just so hopeful that next year we will be getting together and, seeing one another face to face. So I'm gonna start by doing a little bit of reading from the book, from the first chapter, and just give a little bit of an introduction to the book, to Ruby, to how I see the tone of the book. And I think sometimes that's important to hear an author do a reading and give people the sense of where the author's coming from in terms of the tone of the book. So this reading is from the first chapter. There is just give a little bit of a warning in case people need it around. There's alcohol use and drinking in this and sexual content. So I know that this was listed as an adult kind of a presentation, but I just want to make sure that people are aware that that content is in this chapter. Okay, so this is from the first chapter, and this is related to Ruby, who has been meeting with her counselor. I'm going to drop you in kind of partway through the chapter. So Ruby's been meeting with her counselor, Cal, and she has a crush on Cal, and Cal has invited her to have her 4th appointment at his home office. So this is her arriving. She arrived exactly 15 minutes early. She was relieved to see Cal's house wasn't smelly or desperate, or worse yet, too clean. It looked mostly ordinary. As he led her inside, she pointed to a yellow sombrero hanging on the wall between the kitchen and the living room. Nice, she commented. He laughed. Mexico, last winter. I should probably take it down. Don't you dare, she said. It's the best. Hoodies on the coat pegs and sneakers near the back door provided evidence of his kids. He shared custody with his so-called ex. Once during appointment number 3, when Ruby talked about her irrational devotion to Dana, Cal told her, I understand how you feel. I'm still in love with my ex. Are you? Would you go back with her? She'd asked. This turn of events had never occurred to Ruby before. They stopped in the kitchen while he finished making 2 cups of tea. We drank a lot of tea as kids, he said, with loads of milk. She identified drinking milky tea as a kid as a Métis thing. She loved that Cal was part Métis, like her. Only she didn't grow up with her real family, and she never drank tea as a kid, her mother Alice being partial to instant coffee, which had a completely different vibe altogether. She watched Cal pour the hot water into the teapot and longed to know more, to connect to that part of herself she'd never had. I bet you were a cute kid, she said, and filled the room with her big laugh. Cal just smiled and poured the tea. They settled into his office, which was more like an overstuffed den with couches and a big chair. She sat on the couch with its back against the wall. She noticed right away the Métis sashes draped over the end tables and along a shelf, blown glass ornaments lined up on the sash on the shelf, more glassworks scattered on the side and coffee tables, bowls, paperweights, ornaments, colorful blues, oranges, greens, and purples, swirls of molten glass, hardened, shiny, and cold. On the table beside the couch sat a perfectly round glass marble, slightly smaller than a golf ball, clear glass with a purple and green flower trapped inside. Ruby knew X was an artisan, a glass blower. These must have been hers. After some general small talk, Cal asked her an unexpected question. Tell me what kind of kid you were. That's a great question, she said, a big believer in warranted compliments. He smiled a bit despite himself. So, what were you like? I was a serious tomboy, she confessed. I had short hair and I dressed like a boy and I ran wild. All my friends were boys and all I wanted to do was play sports and smoke cigarettes and break shit. What do you think that was about? He asked. Cal, you're too obvious, she said. It's like I can read your mind. He blushed. She loved him even more. If Cal had noticed she was always the first one to call time on their sessions, he hadn't let on. She spent her life being told she was chosen, but constantly needing people to prove it. With Cal, she didn't want to be confronted with the fact that this was a business relationship. She didn't want him pointing out that time was up and she had to leave. She'd rather leave of her own accord. It was like breaking up. She was always the first to call it over. As they were wrapping up, Cal asked her to fill in a questionnaire about how useful the session was and how close she felt to resolving her issue on a scale of 1 to 10. She didn't want to make Cal feel bad by giving him a low score, so she gave it an 8, but on instant reflection, she knew that was too optimistic. She definitely thought they'd made some progress, though. He invited her to his house, after all. When he turned to his filing drawer to return her file, she did something she had no idea she would do. She palmed X's glass marble. As he was turning back to face her, she grabbed her bag as if she was looking for something, dropping the marble into her bag at the same time. She pulled out her bus pass and gave Cal an award-winning smile. When she left, he gave her a hug at the front door. A bit paternal, but still, physical contact. She squeezed good and tight, but not sexy tight or needy tight, just I appreciate you tight. She decided to walk. Cal lived in the east end of the city, and she was in the west. She walked down one of the city's busiest arteries, full of bars, restaurants, tire shops, love shops, you name it. The day had warmed up, and she felt light on her feet. She considered whether she should text Cal to say thanks for today's session. She thought she probably would. She was feeling so good, she decided to stop at a familiar pub. It was only 4 p.m., and the place was nearly deserted. She took a seat at the bar. She ordered a pint of beer and enjoyed the first cold swallow, anticipating the spread of warmth that would let her shoulders relax and eventually fill her with curiosity and cuteness. She fished out her phone to text Cal now, before she had too many drinks. 2 things she'd learned to be careful about. 1, she always lied to her counselors about drinking. Some of them had their own hang-ups about alcohol and drugs, and she didn't want any of them confusing their issues with hers. The second thing she'd learned was don't drunk text, drunk email, drunk Facebook, and so on. Best to get any follow-up text to Cal out of her system now, pre-drink. But before she had a chance to do that, she sensed someone occupy the bar stool next to hers. Next one's on me, said a familiar voice. She closed her eyes for just a second. Dana! Oh my God, she said, as if she was not at all surprised. I was literally just talking about you. He looked confused. To my counselor, she said. Ha, all good things, I'm sure, he laughed, as if they were a couple of corny business buddies out for happy hour, as if he wasn't really bad news, as if she wasn't still in love with him. Actually, I was saying how when I first met you, I wondered if your beard would give me razor burn. But then afterwards, I realized I shouldn't have been worried. She laughed her spectacular laugh so he could remember what he'd been missing. When the bartender came by, Dana ordered another round. The bartender plunked a new pint in front of Ruby, and Dana said, "Big head on that one." "I don't mind a bit of head," she said, taking up her line like there had never been a break between them. "You want to get out of this place?" he asked. She diffused her laugh all over the bar. "It's going to take a lot more to get me out of here," she said. Ruby was deep into her 4th pint when Dana wandered off to the toilet. She knew other women watched him as he made his way through the bar. Part of her wished he wouldn't come back. She pulled her phone out of her bag to distract herself and remembered she was going to text Cal. She texted, "I felt better after talking to you today. Thanks, man in the yellow hat." He texted back almost right away. "No problem. I am happy to help." Not quite the stellar conversation she'd hoped to start. She ordered another beer. "I know we only have 1 session left, but maybe I can see you outside of that. Send." Dana came back to his seat and occupied it in a way similar to the moon blocking the sun. His presence was heavy and full of their bodily knowledge of one another. "I thought Crees couldn't grow beards," she teased Dana, examining his nearly black pelt, his low hairline, dark hair still thick. "What is it with you and my beard?" he asked. "Do you want it that bad? You want to feel it here?" He made a drunken grab for her crotch, more or less missed. "There," she said, pointing her finger, letting it graze his chest. "There it is. That's more like the Dana I know." She hated that she was slurring her words now. "Your beard is a matey beard, isn't it?" She turned back to the bar and sipped her beer. "That explains it," she said to the bartender standing nearby, her eyes big. The Métis needed beards to stay warm. She shrugged her shoulders. I forgot. Her tone implied she was stating the obvious. Cal hadn't responded to her text. She imagined him thinking his way through her question. She realized only one of them had the benefit of alcohol to facilitate this conversation. Finally, he texted, "We can get more sessions approved if that's what you mean." "Not exactly," she sent back. "I'm not sure what you're asking," he texted. "Ever the professional." "I never really wanted a penis." Send. "I was just unaware of the options." Send. And finally, "You know too much about me." Send. From him, silence, and then he said, "That's the problem." She wrote, "I think I'm falling for you." Send. "That's the problem." Send. She ordered a round of shots for her and Dana. The shot glasses were full of a red, sweet concoction, so they had 2 rounds, then 3. "Ruby, let's go for a walk," Dana said, sliding off his bar stool. "Okay, let's walk." She puddled off her seat. You ruined me," she muttered. "But it's not enough yet." And then she said, "I can't walk. You'll have to carry me." The next day, she woke up at Dana's, in his bed, naked from the waist down, her eyes gummed shut, and her shriveled tongue stuck to the roof of her mouth. Her collapsed brain cells cried for water. Slowly, she remembered the stumbling walk from the bar, the taxi, getting sick outside the apartment building, more drinks inside, his bed, her straddling him in muscle memory mode, him on top of her, telling her to slap him, harder, harder, her palm striking his bearded cheek. She couldn't remember using a condom, so got up to look for evidence of one. The thing itself, a wrapper, the ripped edge of a wrapper even. She looked all around the bed, under the pillow, in the bathroom garbage, and in the kitchen. No sign. There were burnt bits of hash all over the stove, bits of tinfoil, and 2 blackened knives wedged in the cold burner rings. She drank from the kitchen tap, looked around for pain meds, found a bottle, and took 4. She went back to the bed. Dana was asleep, curled on his side. She lay down beside him, didn't touch him, just watched. He was snoring lightly, so she knew he wasn't pretending. Her impulse was to caress him, wake him, take more, get more, demand something, extract all she could. She resisted the urge. Sick and willing and almost overwhelming, she resisted the longing to press herself against him, to get as close as possible, as if she could absorb him, fill up on the parts she longed for. She knew indulging this physical desire wouldn't produce satisfying results. Instead, she thought, fill, 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 as her eyes traced his tragic cheekbones, his swollen brown lips. Finally, she got up and left. Last one in, first one out. She stopped to throw up in the hedges beside the sidewalk, looked back one last time before she started running. A dog barked, and soon she slowed down. She walked after that, all the way home, a solid 5 kilometers. She listened to music on her headphones. The first song up on the random shuffle, Sweet Dreams, Eurythmics. She laughed and walked faster. She kept her next appointment with Cal. She didn't tell him about the night with Dana, about later texting Dana with condom questions and getting no response, about going to the clinic to get tested. Instead, she told Cal about the feeling of wanting to fill up on other people, as if she couldn't or wouldn't get enough, as if the people she loved might just disappear or be withdrawn at any moment. "What do you mean, fill up?" Cal asked. "Watch everything, memorize details, absorb it all." She thought about the stolen marble. It occurred to her that this single transgression might ruin everything. She felt ridiculous for having risked her relationship with Cal, foolish for thinking it meant anything for her to have that piece of X's glass, or for him not to have it anymore. "As if you're empty," Cal stated. Captain Obvious, she thought. She searched her bag for a tissue. "What's the matter, Ruby?" I have allergies. So you're not crying? No, definitely not. Not crying. Are you sad? He asked. She looked at Kel straight and hard. We're all sad, she said, surprised he didn't know this already. We're all fucking sad. She wiped her eyes and laughed her above average laugh. She looked at X's ornaments, the blown glass, the cold hardness. She wondered about Cal, if he was just as predictable as the rest in the end. Don't settle for something, she said. She didn't even know anymore which of them she was talking to. Just don't settle, she repeated. Cal looked at her, then to the spot where the marble once was. Ruby closed her eyes and remembered throwing it. Throwing the clear glass marble with its silly little flower. Drawing her outfielder's arm back and letting it fly, hard, at Dana's apartment building, at his bedroom window, and then running away, the sound of breaking glass at her back. A dog started barking, but she kept on running. So that takes you to the end of the first chapter, and it gives the reader a bit of a introduction to Ruby and kind of Ruby, where she's coming from, and a bit of her personality there as well. So in terms of the book is about Ruby. It centers around the character of Ruby. And, you know, Ruby's an Indigenous woman who was adopted by a non-Indigenous family and raised by that family from a baby, from a young age. And really, Ruby spends her entire life in this identity crisis of who she is, and searching, right? Searching for her family, searching for where it is that she comes from and where it is that she belongs. And so she kind of, I like to say, she spends her whole life trying to find her way back home. The other part of the book is it's also got a variety of different perspectives from the people who are related to Ruby or somehow a part of her life. So friends and family, adoptive family, birth family, etc., are all connected to Ruby in these various ways. And so they may have perspectives or stories or little bits from those different people connected to Ruby that are told throughout the book that give that layering effect, or, you know, sort of reveal bits about Ruby as we go along. So this is at the start, in the beginning of the book, there's in the flyleaf, there's a relationship web that's printed in there, and that's a color copy of it. But yeah, I'm not doing a very good job of this because it's backwards. It's like a mirror. But that's Ruby's relationship web and all the people that she's connected to. And when I worked with my first editor, Warren Carrier, we talked about, you know, that idea of relationships and kinship and quote to win, and how important that is for Ruby as a character and in her development. So all of these other pieces and these parts of the story sort of come in and come together and make up part of Ruby's story. And the reader, by the end of the book, there are parts where Ruby has blind spots, right? And she doesn't get to know her whole story, but the reader ends up knowing more about Ruby than Ruby knows about Ruby, which is, you know, the structure of the book and the different perspectives like that, I think, are all there to try and maybe simulate a little bit what it's like for an Indigenous adoptee to go through trying to rebuild their narrative, right? Their story, their history, their past, their, you know, everybody has their own narrative. And for an adoptee, it can be really haphazard and random. And, you know, there's one part in the book where Ruby learns something new about her dad, and she just laughs because she's kind of helpless to do anything else. Like, she can't get mad, she can't even respond emotionally. She just laughs because it shatters her whole narrative again, and she has to go back and rebuild it, right, with this new piece of information. And that's just a recurring thing that happens throughout her life, is that she finds new information, or new information comes to her, and then she just has to rebuild it for herself again, this narrative about herself. I don't know, Janelle, should I pause there, and are there any questions or anything that I need to be doing at this time?
Okay. No questions in the chat at the moment, so I encourage put any questions that you have available for Lisa Bird Wilson in the chat room. But I have a question for you. This is very, and this is going to be, I have always a preamble to this, but setting context. It's very timely, I believe, the topic of reconnecting as an Indigenous person, the whole presence of now we're realizing the impacts of all these different systems that have come through, be it the residential school, Indian Day School, the Child and Family Services, and it always keeps coming. And so I feel like Ruby might have been inspired by someone, so I was curious around that. And who, if it's not a real person, like how does that relate to, I guess, how people are processing these new uncovered discoveries in our relationship to colonialism via the systems? Hopefully that's clear.
No, that's really good. Those are good observations and really good questions. So when I started working on this book, it was about 2016, and I had just finished publishing my poetry collection. And I knew, as I was wrapping that collection up, I really knew internally that I wanted to go back and work on fiction again. I really felt like I loved working on the poetry and being that close to, I don't know, like language and just the way that the poetry worked. But I also knew that I felt more like a fiction writer than a poet. So I wanted to get back to writing fiction. And so, that project was cleared, it was published, it was all good to go. And I sat down to, miraculously write this fiction that I had been dreaming about writing. And I felt like I had nothing, like I didn't know where to go. And I struggled with it for quite a while. And I even said to my partner, I'm not even sure that I have any more fiction left. Like, I don't know what to do with this. So what I did was I just took that, that really sort of cliched advice about write what you know. And I started there. I started working with that. So, as an Indigenous adoptee, I started writing stories, snippets, scenes, whatever would come, because sometimes when you're stuck, you just have to get it out, right? So I started writing these bits and pieces about being Indigenous and adopted. And I also started to think about, how writing like that is so important to me just as a reader, and how when we see each other's stories, when we read each other's stories, we see ourselves reflected, right? And we see our experiences sort of restated or reframed, maybe in a different way, or maybe in a way interpreted in a way that we haven't necessarily interpreted them ourselves. So I got really, really curious about this idea of, it's not only my experience as an Indigenous adoptee, but other experiences, and then thinking about the interpretation of those experiences, and and how that might differ or be the same as my own, but also just then exploring those different interpretations. So that's kind of where I was headed and where I was going. And I honestly thought I was writing a short story collection at that point. And so I wrote and I wrote all these stories, and I got everything down. And then I felt like I had sort of something that I could put together as a group. And I put them all together and I let them sit for a while. And then I went back and I read them all through as a collection. And I got to the end and I thought, I am a terrible short story writer because these all sound like the same person. Like every time I had this character, she sounded like the same person. And then of course I realized, yes, it is the same person, and it's Ruby. And so then I started to really have to develop Ruby as a character and figure out who Ruby is, and how she's connected in all these different ways to the people that are connected to her and to her own story. And so it took a long time to sort of flesh Ruby out. And I think when I got to Ruby's laugh, it took a long time to get there for Ruby to have that big laugh. It allowed Ruby then to have a big personality. It allowed Ruby to just go, because I think before that I was probably censoring myself in terms of thinking, I was just being nice. Like I had to not have this really nice character anymore, because I mean, that just leads to boring writing when you're thinking about, well, I can't write that because what will my boss think? And I can't write that because what will my kids think? And I just had to get rid of that. It took quite a while just to break through that censoring of myself. And when I found Ruby's laugh, then Ruby just let go. Like she was able to just, be who she is as a character. The other thing I'll say about the connections around, that's really insightful, talking about the connections to, really thinking and decolonizing our thinking about where we're at in this colonial system, right? And really understanding that. And there's a part of me that is inclined to write towards that, like towards understanding the decolonial part of things, but with that political voice of that you can bring into things. And you have to be so careful in fiction that that's not what you're doing, because first and foremost, you're writing fiction, right? You're telling a story, you have characters, you have all of this going on, but it's impossible to write as an Indigenous person, from an Indigenous perspective, and also with my Indigenous main character. It is impossible to write that without understanding that foundation and that background of the colonial history and the violence and all of the things that have gone on in our communities. Like that, even though Ruby, she's impacted by it just as a product of the 60s scoop, but she doesn't know or understand even, the residential school history that's in her family. She doesn't know that yet, but it all impacts her. And so, those stories unfold and they come out over the course of the book. And I really hope that for readers, like first and foremost, this is Ruby's story, but I hope for readers, there's that, that little foundational bit of our collective history that resonates afterwards, right? That sort of continues to bubble around a little bit and impact people's understandings and knowledge and awareness. But first and foremost, this is a book about Ruby, and it's that effort or that attempt to humanize Ruby as a character, right? So that readers will connect with her and sympathize with her, and see her vulnerabilities, but also the ways that she is so strong, and she just keeps on living life in the moment and carrying on, because what else do you do?
Yeah, exactly. I think what I wrote down here in this little, and I very much resonate with that. It's like what we find beautiful in the world is actually a reflection of us. So what I find beautiful about Ruby's character is that I see a bit of myself in her. Maybe not at this point in time, but I've been there and I'm here now, and I know that healing process, and I recognize that struggle, and so I really connect with Ruby in that way. So I see myself in her, and I think audiences will and readers will definitely find that connection. We had an audience member ask a question. So Rianne Van Beek asked, did you challenges in writing from different perspectives or in the voices of each of the different people in Ruby's life when you were writing the book?
I don't know. Yeah, that's a good question. In terms of challenges, I'm not so sure I felt especially challenged by that idea, but what I loved about it was being able to sort of take a step away and just completely think about and develop a different character outside of Ruby. And then, the connections to Ruby are sometimes direct, sometimes they're tangential, like they're just not exactly what you think they might be. Um, but yeah, I think that worked for me in terms of being able to break things up. So I'm not really probably a person who could sit down and write a book that goes from A to Z and has a linear kind of a structure. So this book absolutely does not have a linear structure to it. It's it's all over the place in terms of the timeline. So the timeline isn't chronological, and it's also rotates in different perspectives. So I think the first two chapters, and each chapter has a name, like of somebody who's connected to Ruby at the start of the chapter, so you get a little glimpse into that person. But then the chapter may or may not still be about, or I don't know, from Ruby's perspective, or it may completely veer away. So there's the third chapter, and it's called Leon, and it goes back to 1993, and it's a bit of Leon's story there. And so it really shifts over to being just with Leon during that time. But then you will shift back to another time where you're with Ruby. So I enjoyed working with that structure. I liked it quite a bit. I felt like it helped me flesh out Ruby really, really well to understand her background characters and the different characters who were connected to her, and be able to tell little snippets of either their story together or just their story. And then the reader will see later, or see at some point, how that connects together.
Okay. Wow, that's wonderful. I feel like I'm getting a sense that this was a really heartful project for you. Like I'm getting the sense that this was very meaningful pieces of work and that you treat Ruby very precious. Um, so getting ready to launch in a pandemic, how did your art go? I'm interested in knowing like who did your cover art and who are your models, and I just find that the imagery of braiding each other's hair so
Mm.
as a poet so meaningful. It's such an example of what it means to take care of each other. It's multi-layered. I don't know. I love the cover. I just love to hear more about that.
Yeah, I love the cover too. That is the work of Kelly Spitzer, who is an Indigenous artist. She does a lot of things in photography. And yeah, I just loved her work. And we had originally selected a different image for the cover. And I really have to give credit to my publisher as well, who worked with me on finding cover art and finding a cover that I was really excited about, and really really wanted to see on my cover. And so they took some of Kelly's work, and we had a different image in mind at first, and then that image didn't work out. There were a few different reasons that the model wasn't comfortable with it, and so we went to this second image, and I think that this is even better and even more powerful. That notion of, you're right, it's so rich, there's so much in there that could be extrapolated, like even the dual image. Who is Ruby? Ruby really has been more than one person in her life. She was born one person and raised another. And then, like you said, that whole notion of caring for one another, and being connected. And yeah, so I love the cover art. I think it's wonderful. And then my book is coming out April 5th in the US, and so with a different publisher. And so they make a different cover for the US edition of the book. And so Hogarth Press, which is an imprint of Penguin Random House in the States, will be putting that book out. And I wish I had the cover art that I could show you, but it's wonderful. It is, they worked with Christy Belcourt and got permission to use her artwork on the cover, and it's really gorgeous. And so it's a completely different look to the book, but it also works as well. It's got that, you know, Métis theme, beadwork art that is, yeah, just fantastic. So
Awesome. That's what I love to hear. I feel like a very good process. And what I mean is that I like the idea of reciprocation. And so thank you for letting us know Kelly's name, and I'll definitely be looking them up and see what kind of work they have as well. I guess I would love to like maybe pull it more back to the book a little bit. And you mentioned that Ruby was kind of going through a bit of an identity crisis as an adoptee person. I commented that I love the element of laughter in there. Maybe you can tell us a bit about the humor and the purpose of humor for you in the book, or something around you created the humor within your stories within Ruby.
yeah, I think that bit of humor is really, really critical. I really like to have the opportunity to do a reading so that people can hear the book with the, I guess, the tone or the way that I hear the book, right? The way that I would like the book to be sort of taken. And so Ruby can be humorous and can have, you know, that tone to her and still have these vulnerable situations or things that occur in her life. And I think that sometimes I worry that people will pick up the book and read it with just a very dark lens and miss that tone and miss that sense of humor. And so when the publisher, the Canadian publisher, wanted to do the audiobook, and so they auditioned various people to do the reading, and they asked me, you know, to listen to a short clip and see what I thought. And I was really looking for somebody who would read it with the tone that I imagined in my head for the book, which, you know, had that humor in it and had that, you know, ability to not, you know, take it as this dark, dramatic read. I really want to be careful that I'm not writing or promoting some kind of trauma narrative, right, about Indigenous people. And so I was really conscious and aware of that, and really aware of needing to, you know, Ruby to have that laugh and to have that laugh function in different ways in the book. And for Ruby's character to really be larger than life. And the other thing I had to really avoid, or I don't know, like I got to a point where I was done the book and I was working with the editor, and I had a moment of panic kind of in the middle of the night where it was like, oh no, did I miss something? Did I do something wrong? Because Ruby doesn't follow, you know, the narrative, whatever it is, the narrative arc or the narrative story that says she has to like have some kind of a resolution or some kind of a shift or some kind of a aha, you know, and get better or whatever, get better in quotation marks. And that I didn't do that. And that was just my impulse to have Ruby continue on her trajectory, wherever that takes her. Like I imagine Ruby outside of this book just carrying on, right, with Ruby, doing Ruby. And so I said to my editor, I said, oh no, should I have done that? Is that wrong? Like, do I need to go back? Is there something I need to do? And he said, absolutely not. Leave it. You know, that's exactly the thing about Ruby that makes Ruby Ruby, is that you've avoided, you know, trying to sort of make Ruby better, or, you know, get better, or whatever it is. And I really didn't want that for Ruby, because as I look at Ruby, I don't think there's anything wrong with Ruby. I don't think there's anything that Ruby needs to get better from, even though she's all over the place and she's got this kind of wild, chaotic world that she's in and that she creates for herself. I still didn't want to, you know, go there with this kind of resolution for Ruby. So readers won't really find that, but they will find, you know, Ruby's big personality all over the book.
Oh my gosh, that's great. I love that you're bringing in that survivance narratives, that despite anything that happens, or the barriers or lack of access, or, you know, all the things, that they're still thriving in the way that they can, or healing and moving on. That's a really wonderful, because I'm in anti-oppression work, right? So I'm thinking about like how to give people story, the empathy of our peoples, of our depth, of our knowledges, etc. And I feel like through stories, particularly, you know, just sharing this small time with you, this Ruby character would be a really wonderful story to share, to help people understand our cultures. So I'm really excited to be able to get my hands on this and be able to read it. That's awesome. I guess we have maybe time for one more question, but I want to highlight the comment that we had from Rianne Van Beek, is that the idea that we all have stories from our own perspective, but also from others' perspective, is intriguing. I love that you shared with us how Ruby's Laugh unlocked her character and also provided you with greater freedom as a writer. Yeah, I really like that as well. Just to hear that they've unlocked this piece of themselves, um, you know, that was really, I don't know. I love hearing stories like that. It's the way I feel like we can make change as artists, is through storytelling, and even just influencing and giving space for people. That's really important. So thank you for that. I guess my last question. Oh, there we go. Alice also said wonderful. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
Yeah. I really appreciated the drawing that you put up with the family web. Was that something is that exactly how the image looks in your book, or is that your version of it?
So I had a version of this that I used when I was working on the book, so that it kept me organized.
Mm-hmm.
But also, it was just a stick drawing. It was really terrible, and I showed it at some point to my editor, who said, "Oh, we have to use that. let's do that." And I said, "Well, no, not that. That's terrible." So I got my son, who is an artist, to put that one together. And so that's an image of the actual piece of art, but the piece of art is like multimedia, so it's got a lot of texture, and there's different, you know, materials that are used to create it. When they recreated it in the book, of course, it's black and white, and it's quite a bit smaller, but that's how it ends up looking in the book. You still get you get the gist of it, and you get that little drawing of Ruby where she's kind of that double image or whatever. That was, so originally that was functional for me, just to keep me organized in a book. It is incredibly difficult to put a book together in terms of just keeping yourself straight about who and what and when and the timelines and all of that. So I had a lot of I don't know what you call it, like supporting materials that are just off stage that are helping me, you know, just keep things organized. And I would wake up in a cold sweat, you know, thinking, oh no, there can't be a truck in that scene because it was a car before, or whatever. So there's just a lot of detail work before a book can actually come out.
Yeah. So we have one more question from our audience member is who has been your inspiration in the past or
Mm,
even now?
so many Indigenous writers,
Mm.
have come before, and there's so many up and coming Indigenous writers. It's just wonderful to see. Um, yeah, in terms of, I will say one. I don't know how we're doing for time here.
Oh,
Got a
got
few.
9 minutes.
Yeah, good. So at the beginning of the book, there is a what do you call it? A quote at the beginning, or there's two. Oh, I ripped my page there. There's two quotes. I thought sticky notes weren't supposed to do that, but they did.
Oh.
So two quotes at the start of the book, and one's from N. Scott Momaday, and the other one is from Emily Corey Barker. And so I'm going to read you the one from Momaday, because honestly, this essay, so it's from an essay called Man Made of Words, and I've gone back to his writing, like just generally his writing, over and over and over again. But this quote I found, I've really gone back to the concept of it, and I've really, spent time. It has really influenced my work and the work that I've done. So here's what that quote says. We are what we imagine. Our very existence consists in our imagination of ourselves. Our best destiny is to imagine, at least completely, who and what and that we are. The greatest tragedy that can befall us is to go unimagined. And I do find myself circling around that idea, that concept. His writing, I find his writing really, really inspiring, and so rich. Like, it's just full of so much to think about. And so, yeah, if I had to sort of point to inspiration, I would point to Momaday's work, amongst many, many others. Like, there's a lot of inspiration out there.
Wow. Yeah, no, just one quote. We are what we imagine. Oof. There's so much in there. I'm going to look that one up. That's awesome. Thank you for that wonderful offering.
That's a fantastic essay.
Yeah. Any possible last words in our last few minutes that we have?
Well, just thank you so much for being such a great host, and Marcy, to the festival, for having me. And I've really enjoyed, even though I feel like I'm just sitting here alone in my office, I'm not alone. So it's great to just connect and do this kind of work together. And yeah, I've really enjoyed this. Thank you so much for listening and for hosting and for everyone.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you for having me and thinking of me to come in this space as a poet who doesn't write a whole lot on paper and does more performance. It's really nice to be able to use these skills and connect again and be part of a live audience in some sort of way. So thank you for nourishing me as well. Um, I guess we'll thank the festival. Just to let everyone know, audience members, the festival is still happening for the rest of this weekend. With over 40 virtual exhibitors and another talk coming up right away with at Heritage Festival YXC. Tomorrow is a free admission at the Western Development Museum there in Saskatoon all day with afternoon entertainment by the Whiskey Jerks. Visit the Heritage Festival of Saskatoon.com for more details. And thank you so much for taking your time, your energy, your viewing, your internet, to be with us today and for helping us support Lisa and to share these wonderful, beautiful stories such as Finding Ruby. And thank you also to our sponsors. A short video will be shown right after this to thank our sponsors for bringing us here to the space today. So thank you so much, everyone, and we will wish you a good day. Take care.
Marcy.
Yeah, see you later.